This section will cover spousal support issues. If you've both decided that each will waive your right to spousal support, then you can skip this section. You still need to know that your waiver will be a permanent waiver, and even if things change in the future, like one of you loses your job, or one of you takes a turn for the worst in your health, like gets multiple sclerosis or some other disease, or one of you wins the lottery, that you cannot come back and request spousal support in the future. It is a permanent waiver. And so if you have any doubts about whether you're going to need spousal support in the future, maybe you need to consider simply reserving that issue. That will at least maintain the jurisdiction of the court. Now let's talk about spousal support in Minnesota. So the controlling statute is Minnesota Statute 518.552. At least it is currently. And what you need to consider is that even though there's 8 guidelines, that the court is generally looking at, does one party need money in order to be supported for a longer period of time beyond the divorce? And what they look at is they'll look at the party's incomes, the party's monthly expenses, the party's health, relative health to each other, and finally, they'll look at what was the standard of living during the marriage. So I want to give you a historical perspective on spousal support. It originally started back when women were considered chattels to their husband, and meaning property. And what they recognized is that they needed supporting. If you think about it, you think about in a traditional marriage where husband works outside the home and wife stays home and gives up a career or isn't earning money, so they're not collecting any Social Security points for the future. And instead, they're staying home, they're raising the kids, taking care of the home, making sure the family's fed and all of those things. So the courts recognize, and this comes to us from English law, that they call it the widows and children provisions, that someone needs to take care of them because they can't take care of themselves. And so that was the beginnings of spousal support. Well, that's been somewhat eroded today because we're looking at no-fault divorce. And so generally now we're looking at, either spouse may be in need of some spousal support. And that's the current state of the law. Then the other thing you need to know is this concept, we only have basically 2 in Minnesota right now, is permanent spousal support and temporary spousal support. Now there isn't necessarily a preference, but what the courts are saying and the statute says is that if you can't determine how short a time period that spousal support should be, meaning when you're looking at temporary, you're looking at, does someone maybe need some additional training to get them up to speed? I'm thinking like a nurse who might just need to get some continuing education credits and renewing their license. And so in that case, it might be a shorter period of time versus someone who it's been a 30-year marriage and the wife has always been a stay-at-home mom. And in those cases, then that's why the court's preference in those cases is to do what they call permanent spousal support. The only problem with that designation is it requires that if you want the support to end at a certain time period, if you're the obligor, then you're going to have to bring a motion to the court. Well, that's creating a huge problem right now because of all the baby boomers who are now wanting to retire. And the question is when can an obligor retire? And while it certainly makes sense that an obligor should be able to retire, like say at 67 or whatever the age is for Social Security to kick in, it doesn't state that in the law. So that's a consideration you need to think about in doing your own divorce on, are you going to be setting in a time period, if there is going to be spousal support, on when it is going to end. And as you can tell, this becomes more complex, and I'm certainly not suggesting you do it yourself. I'm actually thinking this is a really important area of the law that you might want to have a consultation with an experienced family law attorney to talk about the pros and cons of how much there should be spousal support, if there's any spousal support, and how long it should go on. So there's another concept I want to introduce you to, and that is called the Karon waiver. And it's Karon, and it's based on a case here in Minnesota. And in that case, the parties had agreed that wife would receive spousal support for X period of time, and the amount was a set amount for that time period. Well, at the end of it, wife went back and said, hey, I still need spousal support. And the court said, well, you had a really good agreement, and the two of you, this was negotiated as a part of your divorce as to the length of time and the amount, and you were given certain property because of that, and so we're not going to allow you to now go and ask for more spousal support. So a Karon waiver can be very powerful in divorce cases in, setting a finality so that the obligor knows I am only going to be paying spousal support for this time period and in this amount of money. And the downside of it, though, is what happens if now the obligor loses their job. And that has been, a heated debate, but generally, if you have contracted to pay X amount of spousal support over Y period of time, you're going to be required to continue that contract. So that's really kind of the basics for spousal support. And, obviously the easiest in for your DIY divorce is if you both waive it or you reserve it, but I just wanted to give you some of that background. So that's all for this section.